Hey everyone, good to see you. We are in the second week of our series called Good News for Anxious Christians, and our good news this week was that you don't have to find God's will for your life. We used a lot of different texts, probably 15 or so different texts this week, where we try to go through and look at all the places in the Bible that talk about God's will. But the main text, the most succinct and simple summarization of all the texts we look at is probably Micah 6:8. So you can read that one as a group. It's a famous text where the prophet says, hey, God's will for you is that you would pursue justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with the Lord your God. That is God's will for your life. So question one, what was most interesting or encouraging to you from the sermon this week? Question number two, what was most challenging? What raised questions for you? What did you not understand? What did you not agree with? It's all good. It's all on the table. Question number three, this is something I said that I want you to discuss as a group, and it was really, the big idea. That God's will in the Bible is a general moral will that God has for everybody, and not a singular, specific, perfect will that God has for every individual life. And so we went through and we looked in the Bible at all the places that talk about God's will. And in all of those places, God's will is clearly this general moral will that we would, like Micah said, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. That's God's will, and that's the way the Bible talks about God's will. And we don't really find any places in the Bible that talk about God having this singular, specific, perfect will for your life that it's your life's mission to find. So I want you to discuss that because I know it's a different way probably of thinking about God's will for a lot of us. Question number four. If that's true, right, if God's will is this more general thing, then God's will for your life can be a lot of different things. Okay, it's not just this one thing that you have to find or you missed it, but it could be a lot of different things. And so in discerning that, you should look for the overlap of three things: desire, gifting, and blessing. And so thinking in terms of a Venn diagram, and wherever you get the overlap of those three things, that is within the bounds of God's will for you. And so ask yourself these three questions when you're trying to discern God's will. What am I good at? Right? So that's like gifting. What am I gifted to do? What do I enjoy doing? So that's desire. What desires does God put in me? And then the third question is, what can bless the world around me? So that's blessing. So ask yourself those three questions, and then anything or any place where those three things overlap, that's God's will for you. And you don't have to freak out about finding God's perfect will. That's God's will for you. Any place those three things overlap. Our action step was to do what you know of God's will instead of obsessing over what you don't know about God's will. So I hope that makes for some happy discussing. I hope it's a very liberating idea. I know it might be a little different for some of us, but again, I firmly believe this is the way the Bible talks about God's will, and it is ultimately very liberating to realize and embrace. So happy discussing. Hope to see you on Sunday.